Welcome to Soccer Morning on Backheel.com. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. Welcome into Soccer Morning here on Backheel.com. Happy to have you joining us for a little soccer chat this morning. A big show on tap today. Pablo Maurer, MLSist on Twitter, a gentleman who writes for MLSsoccer.com. And the DCist was out at the DC United Stadium vote yesterday in Washington, D.C. He is a D.C. resident. He will give us his insight into that vote going down. A big day for D.C. United fans. I think my established opinion on this matter is I'm not going to believe it until we got a game going on at this new stadium, but this is the last major hurdle before shovels go into the ground in late 2015, according to Jason Levian, managing partner of DC United, with an opening date scheduled roughly sometime in 2017, either opening the season or perhaps DC will go on one of those long road trips that seem to happen. Also on this program, a Russian football expert, Eastern Europe football expert, Manuel Veth will join us to talk about the currency crash. Veth? Yeah. The currency crash in Russia and how that will impact the Russian Premier League. Remember, it's not just about what's going to happen to these clubs and what's going to happen to these players, something I mentioned on the show yesterday when we talked to Jonathan Johnson. It's about what's going to happen to the preparations for the World Cup in 2018. How are all these things affected? We'll also probably throw in a little bit about Spartak Moscow and their decline. And there's wider ramifications than just in Russian football. The oligarchs have all lost so much money during this crash. I think I read that Usmanov, who is a part owner of Arsenal, lost something like $1 billion, $800 million in 48 hours due to this currency crash. Plenty of talking points there. Seems like it's economics. It has a lot to do with football, and we'll get to that. All right, let's do the headlines before we grab Pablo Maurer. Welcome him in to talk about DC United. They do lead the news today. DC City Council unanimously approves the stadium funding bill that will get a stadium at Buzzard Point built for DC United, slated opening 2017. Shovels in the ground as early as late 2015. I saw plenty of fans, excited DC United fans yesterday on Twitter, offering up their services. Where's a shovel? Give me a shovel. Let's start digging. People are excited for this. There is that element to discuss on the other side of this. Is this a good thing for the city? There are plenty of people out there who believe that any time public financing, public funding is involved in the building of a stadium for a private ownership group, that's the wrong way to go. We'll get Pablo's perspective on that as a DC resident, and I want to make sure that we do that fairly. We discuss both elements of this. It's great for soccer fans. It's great for DC United fans. Is it good for the city? Is it good for the people of DC? Not so clear on that. In FIFA news, because we can't go a day without FIFA news around here, FIFA Executive Committee is meeting in the aftermath of Michael Garcia's resignation yesterday. I believe this is a 2-day session. Notable here, Sepp Blatter's press conferences after these sessions not being streamed live as they were previously. Now, FIFA's excuse on this is that it's not about transparency, but that the press who covers these press conferences would prefer that these streams not be available. I find that very, very difficult to believe. This is, again, FIFA going into circle the wagons mode, looking to protect themselves against a new round of criticism in light of what Michael Garcia has done. In fact, I believe that in the height of hilarity, FIFA attempted to charge Michael Garcia under their ethics statute for his decision to resign. I mean, once the guy's out of their purview, it's unbelievable. More FIFA. Tom Marshall, our friend Tom Marshall, Mexico World Cup on Twitter, covers Mexican soccer for a couple of outlets, has reported that Cubo Torres will not be returning to MLS to start the 2015 season and will in fact go back to Chivas de Guadalajara for a 6-month. Whether this means that certainly covers the Clausura down in Mexico. Whether that means he will then return to MLS, I don't know. This is all coming in the immediate aftermath of reports that both the Seattle Sounders and LA Galaxy passed on the opportunity to sign Cubo Torres, and that was the Houston Dynamo who were next in line. He could have been a big box office draw for Houston. He certainly could have put some butts in the seats, and he scored some goals for Houston. Houston's going to need some goals next year. Owen Coyle coming in. I'm sure he could have found a way to use Cubo Torres, but it looks like Cubo will go back to Mexico for the time being. I'm disappointed by this news. I have the sads over Cubo Torres leaving MLS. We'll have to keep track of his progress and see. Again, I don't know the particulars of this deal and whether or not MLS has an option to bring him back, whether this means he's now on loan to Chivas de Guadalajara from MLS. There are a lot of moving parts here when it comes to the contract and whether or not Cubo Torres is the property, and I hate saying that players are property, but that's essentially what we're talking about here, of Chivas de Guadalajara or of MLS, or of a particular team in MLS if you want to go down to that level. I do not know that. Perhaps we can get an update on that from our friend Tom Marshall or Eric Gomez, who I know has been tracking this story closely as well. All right, so what do you do if you're a nation of over 1 billion people and your national soccer team sucks? What do you do if your international team is just putrid? Despite the fact that you have this vast population to draw from. Now, I'm not talking about the United States of America here, ha ha ha. I'm talking about China. And if you're China and your team stinks and you have you have no goals in World Cup competition, what do? You make the game compulsory for school children. This is what This is what China's president is doing. Xi Jinping is so embarrassed by China's dismal FIFA World ranking, that he's going to great lengths to try to improve it. Beginning in 2017, soccer will become a compulsory part of the national curriculum, according to a recent piece of The Economist. Education officials say improvement must start with children, meaning kids will learn soccer alongside more common school subjects. The country's stated aim is to generate 100,000 new players by 2017 via 20,000 new soccer training facilities that are scheduled to be built. China's failure to qualify for the previous 3 World Cups is said to have spurred the initiative. The most populated country in the world hasn't reached the World Cup finals since 2002. Maybe we should make soccer compulsory in the United States. Bomb on this. We're going to open up relations with Cuba, do that whole immigration executive order thing, and make soccer compulsory for school children in the United States. That's how we would be better. That's what we should do. In the Club World Cup, the second semifinal, San Lorenzo of Argentina beat Auckland City of New Zealand 2-1 after extra time to reach the finals of that tournament. They will face Real Madrid, who demolished Cruz Azul 4-0 the other day. This tournament does not get the attention that a lot of people think it deserves. Certainly, as a mechanism for crowning a club world champion, it is questionable, and yet here we are, probably with the 2 best club teams based on their previous accomplishments by winning UEFA's Champions League and obviously the Copa Libertadores for San Lorenzo. This was an interesting game, by the way. San Lorenzo having a difficult time with Auckland City. It was 1-1 going into extra time before the Argentine side managed to find the winning goal. All right, there you go. There are your headlines. It's a big Thursday edition of the program. Pablo Maurer, host of Open Wide for Some Soccer, MLSist on Twitter, DCS contributor, MLS Soccer contributor, Washington, D.C. resident. He'll join us in about 1 minute to talk about this D.C. United Stadium funding being passed. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, backheel.com.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on backheel.com with Jason Davis.
We are back, and on the phone with me now, Pablo Maurer, MLSist on Twitter, covers soccer for MLSsoccer.com and DCist, and does other things as well. Is a Washington, D.C. resident and hosts Open Wide for Some Soccer, which you can find on backheel.com. Pablo, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Jason?
I'm good, man. All right, so D.C. United's got a stadium deal done. The City Council of Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, has approved the funding for this deal that would give the team or put $150 million into the project, depending on how you want to look at this. And I'm going to start with the good. This is an exciting day, exciting 24-hour period here for DC United fans who finally have a stadium to look forward to after 19 years. Now, it's going to be a couple more years before the place gets built, but 19 years in a crap hole that is RFK. What does this mean for United fans today?
First of all, I'll take exception to you calling RFK a crap hole, but
it's your crap. It's your crap hole, Pablo. It's your crap hole.
It's hard to state. Obviously, I think the importance of this to United's fan base, because it's been such a long process. I mean, obviously, the club's been around for 19 years, but for at least the past decade, they've been, working to try and find a home of their own. At first in Poplar Point in D.C., and then in PT County, and the rumblings of Baltimore, Virginia. So this has been a long process, a long build up to yesterday's announcement. So obviously this is huge news for an MLS original and one of the most decorated, arguably the most decorated club in the league. So big deal.
It was interesting when Jason Levian came in with Eric Toe here. There was one of the things that he talked about was getting a stadium deal done, and there was sort of a promise there. And much was made about Levian's connections in DC, but we saw some fits and starts, and you wondered if it was actually going to get done or if he didn't have the pull to make it happen. What actually came together? I mean, is it Jason Levian who gets all the credit here? How much is this on Vincent Gray? How much is this on some of those other supporters in the city council? How much is on Mario Bowser, who helped, sort of reconfigure the deal after the Reef Center came out?
Yeah, I mean, I think Levian deserves a massive amount of credit here. I talked to him yesterday and just asked him point blank if there were different times during the process when he actually thought it wouldn't get done, and he was pretty candid and said, yeah, there were plenty of times. I think this whole was a bit of a learning one for him, but certainly he got the job. You're a local. I live in DC. We all know that things operate a little differently in the district when it comes to local politics. So I think this took probably longer than he would have anticipated, but he managed to get the deal taken care of. I do think Muriel Bowser deserves a lot of credit because, whether the deal as it stands now is better than the original deal is sort of up for debate. But one thing's for sure, and that's that the deal as it stands now is more palatable to the general public. Obviously, some quick background. Bowser several weeks ago moved in and removed a land swap arrangement in the original deal that had become kind of a lightning rod. I think a lot of DC residents thought it was just sort of a little murky and overcomplicated, and council members, expressed that the city was getting the best deal. So obviously, it's a savvy political move on her part. Just a month or two before coming in office to sort of swoop in and reconfigure a deal that was designed in large part by her predecessor. Mm-hmm. But also, I mean, I'm of the opinion that this deal doesn't get done unless that land swap comes out. So I think Bowser certainly deserves a lot of credit.
So you were down there yesterday to witness this. I mean, again, it's a historic moment for United fans. We'll get to the elements of what this means for the city and the good and the bad and your appreciation of that as a resident. But just paint the scene for me. I mean, I've watched some of these city council things. I watched Orlando's get passed. I watched Portland's get passed in terms of, upgrading that stadium for an MLS team. Those were expansion situations, or they're a little bit different. Was there a buzz in the building? How many fans showed up? What was the attendance like in terms of this is a momentous occasion for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number of fans that were, well, first of all, the council chambers in DC are relatively small, and they don't let anybody stand in the room, so it sort of limits the, when half of the room is press, there's only so many fans that can make it in. But not to mention the council is or the hearing was also rescheduled at the last minute this week, so I think that limited the fan involvement. And I will say, you watch, for example, Orlando's announcement, and it was this jubilant, a cheer went on in the room.
Right.
I think for DC, there wasn't any of that. There was no cheering, no clapping, but I think when you look at DC's fan base, I guess I would describe the feeling among the fan base more as one of relief than of jubilation. It's been, like I said, this has been a long, arduous process for the club and for supporters, so to see the deal get done, at the moment when they took the vote and it was, passed unanimously, you definitely felt like an exhaling from, all the supporters in the room, so, there was no bottles being popped, so to speak, but I just think that maybe the mood that the fan base was in is a little bit different than, in Orlando or Portland.
Sure. I did read a piece that talked about a celebratory event at Penn Quarter afterwards, and some people coming into that establishment, and the notion of Muriel Bowser running around yelling "Vamos" is something that I find pretty amusing. Again, I'm going to come back to her for just a second, and only to use her as an example of, is this sort of a symbol that DC United has relevance in the city that maybe some people don't appreciate, or is it properly rated and, hey, they are part of the fabric now? It seemed like there were politicians who legitimately thought, hey, we got to have soccer here.
Yeah, that was a common refrain, I think, in the both from council members, from Gray, and obviously also from team officials, Ben Olsen in particular, all of them saying, soccer is a global sport, and DC is obviously a very, very diverse global city. It's, quote unquote, our nation's capital. So I think, when you look at soccer history in the United States, I don't know that there's a city that has more than Washington DC. I don't know that there's a stadium that has more soccer history than RFK. So I think obviously to lose DC United or lose MLS in the city would have been a huge blow, not just to DC, but to soccer in America in general. So yeah, I think there was definitely an understanding, and I don't know how many council members are actually soccer fans, but I don't think it hurt that we're coming off a World Cup year where they see massive interest in the city. We're coming off DC United had a obviously pretty miraculous turnaround this year. I think that sort of put a bug in a lot of their head that, hey, maybe this is something that we should take a little more seriously. So. No, I definitely think that's definitely a recurring narrative in the past few months has been the importance of keeping soccer in the district, which is, as a soccer journalist and a soccer fan is a great thing, obviously, to hear your
it is your local government, and the numbers that are being thrown around, and sometimes these things change, but it's a $300 million stadium project, $150 million for the actual construction coming from the team owners, $150 million being financed by the city, and that's mostly infrastructure and purchasing the land that the stadium will sit on. Cost overruns for the construction, as far as I am aware, will be absorbed by the team. But, look, there is an element of, hey, every single stadium deal that involves city money is a bad stadium deal. Where do you sit on that as a DC guy, and then in particular with this deal?
Well, I'm going to preface this by saying that I just in general don't typically support, public dollars being used for sports stadiums. I think that I think the United Stadium is a relatively small project compared to a lot of others, which makes it a little bit easier for me to digest. I think it's important to, and several council members, in the hearing said this yesterday. It's important to sort of get the numbers in a more realistic place. I think, yourself and many others, and it's just an easy thing to say, well, the city's investment's $150 million. Well,
right.
The anticipated investment right now is actually, I think, $138. But, if you factor in the sales tax abatements the city's giving the team, and then sort of stretch the cost out over 30 years. David Catania, who's a council member in D.C., said that the price gets closer to $400 million. A $400 million investment over 30 years. It's safe to say that it's a guaranteed $200 million investment, basically. Between the abatements and what the city's borrowing. So I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to say. Where do I stand on it? I don't know that my opinion is incredibly relevant.
Well,
but
sure.
I certainly think that there may be other things in D.C. that that people's tax dollars would be better served going to.
Okay, fair enough.
Having said that, like I said, I don't think the deal is a raw deal for the city. I don't think I think there's certainly been far worse stadium deals. I think the team. I'll give the team credit for conceding a lot of their property tax abatements that they gave up. And they always intended to do this, but they made concessions to the neighborhood. There's a community benefits package that was part of this deal. So this isn't a situation where, for example, our local American football team, I think when they come back to the district, in several years or 5-10 years, whatever, I think they'll get a much sweeter deal than DC United.
Yeah, it's just funny. I think a lot of people who don't live in DC or maybe never lived in DC, don't know the area, are pretty quick to condemn this deal because it's just part of that whole trend of, hey, and cities should not be spending public dollars on what is essentially a private enterprise. Yeah, there's public trust involved, Pablo, but it's not really something that benefits the public directly. There's lots of economic studies that say, there's not really any tangible benefit to putting a stadium in a neighborhood necessarily. Aaron Gordon at Vice really destroyed a New York that was sort of talking about how this area at Buzzard Point is just an industrial wasteland, and once you put the stadium in, it's going to create all this stuff. And I always feel like maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. No, the economic benefits are not necessarily tangible, but there's got to be some reason to do this. Otherwise, why would you?
Yeah, of course. I mean, certainly if you look at the critics of stadium are quick to use the independent study the council asked for to point out. They were quick to use that to point out the flaws, say, in the land swap portion of the deal, but don't necessarily positives that the city does. I mean, worst case scenario, I think the city stands to make $20 or $30 million off of this, and so certainly I don't think the city's going to lose money. The advice piece that you're referring to, I certainly enjoyed. It cracked me up that the author said that United has 3 billionaire owners, or I guess the Times person said that, and he, the Vice Aaron, whatever, perpetuated that myth, which isn't true. There's one debatably billionaire owner and two who certainly aren't.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, certainly there are benefits. I think it's obviously stadium issues are hot button ones for local residents, and another thing that I've often had to remind myself in this process is, everybody has an opinion when it comes to a stadium deal, and a lot of those same people then the very next day aren't even involved in sort of what's going on with their local government. There's certainly, I'm sure, deals that go on in D.C. every week or every month that cost the city more money than the stadium. So it's been I think the entire stadium process has been an interesting study in human behavior and
well, yes, right. We pick and choose what we want to get upset about, and it was interesting to see our friend Charlie Boehm on Twitter having an argument with a guy I respect, Mike Goodman, who writes at Grantland the other day about Mike saying this is a bad thing because, hey, the public dollars, private stadium, blah 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 blah. And Charlie's like, hey, I live here, I'm okay with this. Does my opinion matter? Where's our representation in Congress? And that's
that's 100% true. It is funny to hear people from outside the district chime in on this and sort of again selectively disregard what people in the city how they feel about it, especially when we have I would wonder how many of those people even know that we don't have representation in Congress, voting representation in Congress.
You know what? Mike Goodman might be a DC guy too. I mean, it is happening even within these little pockets, these little circles. People who live in the district are on both sides of the issue. I guess that's always going to happen. All right, so Pablo, before I let you go, project yourself in your mind. If you have to close your eyes, you can do that. To opening day at DC United Stadium. I'm sure there'll be a corporate sponsor. Let's not ruin it with that. In either March or July of 2017, whenever this building actually opens. 25,000 people there to cheer for DC United in a building built for soccer. There's no crumbling concrete. There's no leaky floors. There's no exposed pipes. The press box is maybe it's open, but it's properly tempered. The temperature is proper for the assembled press. Oh, first of all, where would you want to be, in the stands or in the press box?
I mean, I think another major question is there wildlife involved at that point? You know, do they bring the raccoons and the wasps and, you know, all that stuff from the, I mean, I think throwback stuff is, they're talking about having bouncing fans at this new place, obviously duplicate the feel of RFK. Do they also bring falling concrete just every now, you know, every now and again to reminisce? I don't know. I can't wait. Obviously I followed the game for years. I'm a huge soccer fan, so, you know, I take these road trips every year to cover away games and, you know, to Sporting Park or Red Bull Arena, and you sort of, it's almost like you see how the other half lives, you know? So, I'm very, very eagerly anticipating moving from RFK to a new facility. That having been said, I love RFK.
Sure.
I think it's a beautiful historic venue, and I genuinely shed a tear when it meets the wrecking ball. But you know, you're talking to somebody who takes photos of abandoned buildings for a living, so maybe I have a strange fascination with that stuff.
I think maybe you are just slightly different than the general population, Pablo, but that's why we love you, and that's why people should check out not only your soccer stuff, but your abandoned work as well, whether it's the photographs, the written content, whatever it is. Follow him, MLSist, on Twitter. Read his work at DCist and MLSsoccer.com, where he covers DC United. Pablo Maurer, also host of Open Wide for Some Soccer, one of three hosts at Open Wide for Some Soccer, which you can find here at backheel.com. Pablo, thanks for your insight, man. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. All right, there we go. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Manuel Veth. We'll talk Russian football, the economic crash in Russia, what that will mean for the Russian Premier League, the World Cup in 2018, some other things as well. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, backheel.com. Be right back. I turn my camera on.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on Backheel.com with Jason Davis.
Here we go, backheel.com, Soccer Morning on the line with me now. Manuel Veth from Football Grad. Follow him on Twitter at Homo Sovieticus. Try to get that out. Manuel, how are you, sir?
I'm all right. How about you?
I'm well. I'm better than the Russian economy at this point. I'm sorry, it had to be done. The ruble is crashing, Manuel. And that's ostensibly that's the reason to have you on the show, because I am sort of fascinated by what impact a crashing Russian currency might have on football in that country, not just for the league itself, and the Russian Premier League has been on the rise in recent years, but also potentially for World Cup 2018 and preparations for that tournament.
It's going to be an interesting development, although I think that World Cup 2018 is just too far away to really, to really look at the current crisis and say, oh, that's going to impact World Cup 2018. I think that's just a bit of a stretch.
Sure.
Just to maybe go back a bit, the last time Russia experienced something like this was in 1998, and they actually went bankrupt. But the economy actually recovered within 6 months. So, if you take history as an example, I think that World Cup 2018 is not going to be affected by this at all.
Sir. So those preparations should continue, or whatever needs to happen may come after a recovery period. Now, in the short term, though, and I'm not an economist. I don't know your background. Maybe you can give us a little bit more insight. Certainly that history plays into it. But in the short term, what does this mean for some of those Russian Premier League clubs who, especially over the last 5 or 6 years, have really started to pay big salaries for talented players? Manuel, you with me?
Yeah, sorry, you broke up there for a second. Just to rephrase the question, what does it mean in the short term for Russian clubs, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Financially. Yes. Well, in the short term, really the big problem for them will be the fact that the budget is exploding, because a lot of the players are paid with foreign currency, be it US dollars or euros, and which means, like, even though the oligarchs are going to be able, or the oligarchs or the big companies that are behind the clubs, they'll be able to foot the bill. Some of the bigger clubs might run into problems with financial fair play, because as the budget explodes, financial fair play regulation is supposed to limit budgets, the costs of clubs, right, that are playing European football. So that's actually something that's going to slam them the most.
And what will be the response then? I mean, if they're going to attempt to stay within the boundaries of financial fair play, and we've seen some of the punishments for being afoul of those rules for Manchester City, for PSG. Those are big clubs with lots of money. They can sort of absorb those things, certainly bring themselves back into compliance. Is that something that Russian clubs can do?
Well, you have to remember Zenit was actually punished last summer as well. They were the third club. They got the same punishment as Manchester City and Paris Saint-Germain did. So because of that, they're already on UEFA's radar, and there's been lots of talk that they're going to sell one or two of the big names, the most obvious ones being Witzel and Hulk.
Is that, again, sort of the further impact on Russian football, if they are required, if they end up having to sell some of these big players, does that hurt the league? I mean, again, I sort of outlined how Russian football has been on the rise. We've had the schedule switch ahead of the tournament with Russia going to the rest of the European calendar, perhaps to compete in the Champions League. That's the goal. Yeah,
that is the goal. I mean, what is the point of having these expensive players playing in the Russian Premier League if you are not competitive in European football? And I mean, Gazprom has been outspoken about that. Some of the other clubs have been outspoken about that. I mean, they won the UEFA Cup, the predecessor of the Europa League, both CSKA did and Zenit. But, you want to be competitive in the Champions League, and they're just not able to do it. And this might affect them even further.
certainly we know that money gets you far in the Champions League. You can get into that tournament. Maybe you can even be an FC Basel and make it to knockout rounds despite not being able to compete with the big boys in terms of your wage bill. But in the end, if you want to go and win it, you got to spend a lot of money. We're seeing how difficult even that is with Manchester City, for example. Again, I mean, you identify Zenit. We know that there are several clubs within the Premier League who have the sort of financial backing that may push them forward in the short term. But I guess what I'm going to ask you is there enough groundwork laid? Is there enough revenue from beyond, say, personal fortunes to keep these clubs relevant for extended periods of time?
Are these clubs self-sustainable? That is the question,
essentially,
right?
Yes.
No, they're not. They are not at this moment. There is attempts to do it. The big problem being that at the moment there is no TV money in Russian football itself. And ticket prices, it's extremely cheap to go to Russian Premier League games. It's actually probably the best deal if you want to see high performance football in Europe. The Russian Premier League will be the best deal that you will ever get as a visitor. But it means that the clubs are making very little money with ticket prices, and they're making very little money compared to the big leagues as in TV money. There is some ideas to fix that, but at the moment these clubs are not self-sustainable at all.
Well, what are the ideas to fix that? Why is there not any TV money, and why are ticket prices? So I'm not advocating for higher ticket prices for fans necessarily, Manuel, but why are those ticket prices so low?
Well, you have to remember that the Soviet Union is still pretty fresh. The history of the Soviet Union, and traditionally ticket prices have been always very low in Russian football. And as the economy is growing, well, it's not growing right now, but it was growing until about 2007, 2008. A lot of things, like a lot of common prices, did not rise. You see that in other aspects of the Russian economy as well, where, for example, transport costs are still very cheap for people. That's because there's a huge gap between also the city and the rural Russia, where people don't make as much money. So I think it's kind of just, it really reflects how much money people really are able to spend, in a sense. The TV money is another issue, and there have been some crazy proposals about fixing that. Until the conflict in Ukraine came along, there was the idea to create a joint league with Ukraine. And a Gazprom-related television station actually offered to pay 1 to 2 billion euros a year for the league in TV money and prize money, and that would have basically guaranteed self-sustainability for the big clubs of Russia and Ukraine. But obviously that has kind of fallen on the wayside for now.
Certainly, and I don't know where FIFA would have landed on that, provided there was no conflict. But clearly, that's not top of mind at the moment when it comes to Ukraine. There are obviously some Russian clubs that people who don't really watch the Premier League or aren't aware of the intricacies of the league are aware of, and CSKA comes to mind, Dynamo Moscow, so the Moscow clubs. I think first and foremost, on obviously Zenit. When it comes to those Moscow clubs, first of all, is Moscow the type of town that does well supporting that number of clubs in the top division?
The answer is yes and no. It really depends. Right now, Moscow has a huge stadium problem. They're sort of fixing it. Spartak has, as I wrote in my article, Spartak has just opened a new arena. CSKA is going to open a new arena. The Luzhniki Stadium is being fixed, but we saw Champions League games in Khimki, which is really the outskirts of Moscow. And imagine going from New York to New Jersey to watch a New York game. That's basically what it is like, and that's been a bit of an issue. So, although the arena in Khimki is quite nice, it's such a track for fans to go there. So the attendance hasn't been that great. That said, Spartak pulls about 25,000 fans a game. But when you compare that to the numbers that the league got in back in the Soviet Union, it isn't really that great.
Well, I mean, that's interesting because once the Soviet Union collapsed and everything was opened up, Manuel, I imagine, just like we're dealing with here in the U.S. on a sort of different dynamic in terms of the eyeballs going to other leagues outside of the country, rather than Russian football fans just defaulting to going to their local game or watching their local game on TV. They're obviously paying attention to other leagues. Is that a drain on Russian football?
I think that's a drain on any football outside the big three leagues in Europe. It's a very common problem. I mean, even when you go to football hotbeds like the Netherlands, they watch German and English football on TV as well. It's something that's just come up, and the development of the Champions League, I think, is really key there. 93 is when we saw it, and that's when the big leagues sort of became very big, and some of the smaller leagues kind of fell onto the wayside. And I think since then in Europe we have this development that everyone, of course, it started with the Premier League. Everyone started watching the Premier League, and now La Liga and the Bundesliga are now becoming very strong forces as well, and they're sort of curbing away on those niche leagues. So I think that's a European-wide phenomena at this point.
In light of that, I mean, it certainly seems, and tell me if I'm wrong, if my characterization is incorrect, but it seems like the Russian Premier League was interested, certainly the big clubs, the clubs that had, again, the backing of perhaps an oligarch, somebody with a lot of money, the corporation, that they wanted to skip the step of, self-sustainability. They wanted to go from what they were to sort of Champions League contenders year in and year out, or a big league that could compete on some level approaching the Bundesliga or the Premier League without having to go through that middle process. And see the way things work now, especially with television and the Champions League, this is just an entrenched situation. Those big three are entrenched, and you may not ever approach them. And it may be better and more pragmatic for the Russian league to focus on some less sexy sort of elements.
I mean, and that would be also maybe beneficial for the national team.
Sure.
And I mean, when you look at some other countries, that's sort of the approach that they have taken. I've spent a significant amount of time in Ukraine, and at the time when I was living there, I was sitting down with one of my Ukrainian journalist friends, and we were discussing the joint league between Russia and Ukraine, and sort of like it would have been really a great idea, but it on the other hand, it would also hurt some of the development of the smaller clubs. I mean, this is debatable, of course, but then the discussion came to Poland, and in Poland there is rich owners in Polish football as well, but they seem to take a lot slower of an approach, as in that they don't necessarily spend the millions and millions and millions on foreign players, and rather have been seeing more of a youth development. And the Polish national team has been developing quite nicely in the last year or so.
It certainly seems to be the better long-term approach, but everybody wants, I mean, we live in a society that wants everything immediately. It certainly happens here. I imagine it happens in Russia. Emmanuel, I want to point people to your piece on Spartak at footballgrad.com, and we sort of danced around some of these elements. Just to give me a brief history of Spartak and what they meant to Russian football, where things are at this point, and what the future might hold for that club.
Yes, Spartak is actually, I mean, we took sort of that, as you said, we danced around some of these issues. Spartak is a really interesting one because they were the people's club, or considered the people's club in Soviet football. That's because they were not associated with any of the big ministries, the Ministry of Defense being one, which operated Red Army or CSKA Moscow, and the Ministry of Interior being the other, which operated the Dynamo franchises, which there are several in the post-Soviet space, Dynamo Kiev being one and Dynamo Moscow being another. And Spartak always stood kind of in the opposition to those Dynamo clubs, and we had a very strong competition with Dynamo Kiev in the 1980s. And then the fall of the Soviet Union meant that a lot of these highly competitive clubs left the league, and the first 10 years Spartak was a very dominant force in Russian football, and maintained this like image of Russia's most beloved club. That all changed after the crisis of 1998, where the Russian economy went bankrupt, because it's our transition to a resource-based economy, and that sort of started the rise of the oligarchs and the rise of big Russian resource industry, like the likes of Gazprom, etc., which then took over clubs. And it's really interesting how this last crisis sort of changed the dynamic of Russian football and sort of left Spartak a little bit in the dust. So that's a bit of a background. And the current owner is actually an oil man as well, Leonid Fedun. He is an oligarch. He is the second in command of Lukoil, which is Russia's most only big private oil company. So that's Spartak in a nutshell. And they're hoping to fix a lot of the problems with the new stadium, which is going to be interesting to see if they can actually do it.
Yeah, I'm going to turn to you, the oligarchs, and obviously they're not just involved in Russian football. They have gone out into the world, and they have become major figures in European football outside of Russian borders, or former Soviet borders, for that matter. You have obviously Abramovich at Chelsea, you have Usmanov at Arsenal. There are the gentleman at Monaco whose name escapes me. And I just read this morning, or I saw this morning, the stats on how much Usmanov lost during this crash of the currency, something like $800 million, which, for the rest of us is insane. But I'm not sure I'm not sure how much of a problem that is for him, and I don't know if it's going to have any impact on his ability to be a player at Arsenal, or to take it to Abramovich, whether his losses, which may have been significantly less, but still a small fortune, will impact his ability to keep Chelsea on the level they've been for the past decade.
Oh, I think that with the like of Abramovich, he has, I'm very certain about this. He has taken most of his currency, most of his income, and turned it into hard currency, which actually means that this is not going to affect him hugely. I mean, of course, he still has some business back in Russia, but he's actually a lot of his assets are sold. A lot of his assets already in the first half of the 2000s. So he cashed in quite early. So he should be fairly unaffected by this. He will take a bit of a hit, but if you're worth $6 billion or $4 billion, doesn't really make a huge difference. It's laughable, but it's really the truth. And Chelsea is actually, I think, last year or this year, they actually managed to, for the first time, to reach self-sustainability. So they should be fine either way. AS Monaco is another one. Dmitry Rybolovlev. He's taking a hit from this, and he's also just gone through a messy divorce, which also took away half of his money, and that has sort of already shown when he's officially said we have to sell all these big players like James to Real and Falcao to Real United. We have to sell them because of financial fair play. The reality is probably that he has just lost too much money at this point and just needs to take a step back a little bit. So that's a very good example. And you get a little bit of it's really interesting how some of the big players and big Russian players have reacted to this crisis. It's sort of like no one is actually openly really complaining, but it's sort of like a underhand comments like, I'm under a lot of stress because of the currency problem. But it's sort of like this little crumbling, which actually tells me that some of these players might be in a big trouble.
Manuel Veth, footballgrad.com is where you can find. He is on Homo Sovieticus. I follow him there as well. Manuel, thank you very much for your time and your insight. And I think we all should all hope that the currency crash in Russia doesn't ruin those efforts in Russian football. Appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Yep, there you go. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll open up the phone lines. The Twitter machine will get going. You can jump in on several different topics. Las Vegas has approved a stadium deal as well without a team. Soccer Morning, backheel.com. Don't go anywhere. Be right back.
Came the urge to run away, but hold her down with soggy clothes and breeze blocks. Citrazine, your fever scream me again. Never kisses, or do you ever send a full stop?
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on Backheel.com with Jason Davis.
Here we are, Soccer Morning on a Thursday. Thank you very much for listening at Backheel.com or on podcast or through the YouTube archive streaming thing. However that works. I hear that there's a new chat at Backheel.com, which, as Trevor correctly points out, lets you hurl insults at me or the show in general during the program or whatever you want to. Just insults. Just hurl them. It's fine. It's interesting because I was just I randomly came across an infomercial the other night for Dean Martin roasts from the 1970s. And of course, Don Rickles is a major part of these roasts, and he was a master of insult comedy. And I don't think I could ever be that mean on purpose to anybody. But, you know, those things are hilarious. Those roasts are fantastic. It was a different time back then. You had Dean Martin doing his drunk guy thing. A host of celebrities. And what happened is you could buy all of these Dean Martin roasts through Time Life, whatever. $49.99. I was like, I can go to YouTube and watch them. So, yeah, I went to YouTube and I watched them. That's what I did the other night. This is what I did instead of what Vince's Toronto was asking. He said, how did I enjoy Christmas Story 2? Which I tweeted a picture of the guide on some network showing a Christmas Story 2, which I did not know existed, which bothers me a lot. Something about Ralphie, Daniel Stern was in it, and it was 2.5 hours long, and I don't know what's happening anymore. But no, I did not watch Story 2, Vince. I watched Dean Martin roasts from the 1970s instead. I watched Billy Graham get up and roast somebody. Bob Hope, maybe. That's what I did. We do have other soccer to touch on this morning. If you want to jump in, 347-756-6276. That's the phone number. Talk about the D.C. Stadium vote, Russian football, and the ruble. Those are the two major topics we covered today. But as I mentioned, Las Vegas approved a stadium plan, which is contingent on the city getting an MLS expansion franchise. And I guess what I'll put to you, and I know we've got some listeners out there, maybe not listening live. It is early still in Vegas. But I'll put to you whether or not you believe that this deal being in place, being approved, makes it more likely MLS will take plunge and go to Vegas. I think the opinion on whether or not it's a good idea for an MLS Vegas is split along the lines of, well, it'd be incredibly fun to go on an away trip to Vegas on one side, and the other side going, hey, it's Vegas, could be trouble. We have at least one listener, maybe not on this show, but definitely on the Best Soccer Show, who lives in Vegas, who says categorically it's a bad idea to put a team there. That you can't have guys making $40,000 a year in a city that is rife with gambling, that perhaps has its underworld elements. He said the heat is a problem. Now, an argument against the heat is that we play during the summer in Dallas, in Houston, in D.C., where it can be 95 degrees with 100% humidity. Is that really any worse than, 102-degree dry heat in Vegas? I don't know. People who played in conditions will tell you it's probably better to play in the heat of Vegas. Then again, if you put a team in Vegas, they build this stadium, and it doesn't have air conditioning, aren't you just really making the argument that it's okay to go play in Qatar in the summer? It's a little hotter in Qatar, don't get me wrong. But isn't that really, you're just giving them ammunition? Like, they play in Vegas. Vince says, wouldn't match results in Vegas not better than the rest of MLS since what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? Slap yourself, Vince. It's not good. It's a bad joke. Dave, what's up, man?
Hey, I've never had the impulse to throw insults at you, but if I ever did, I would just call the show, and you would in your inimitable way, tell me where to put it, and that would be the end of it. So people using whatever the tool to insult you, Get a sack and call up the show.
Hey, David, I don't disagree with you, but you know how the internet works, man. Go look at the YouTube comments on anything, but especially even on this show. There's plenty of people. Oh, look at why is he's an idiot. He doesn't know about this. He doesn't know about that. Look at that terrible scarf. I mean, people will insult anything. It's because anonymity is a powerful tool, David.
Yeah, Jason, I just want to ask you about something. I missed the show yesterday, so perhaps you discussed it. But I'm wondering, did you hear about the USL supposedly applying for Division II status? I'm wondering if that's a real story, and if so, I would just be fascinated to hear what Bill Peterson has to say about that. And about the general discussion that since we got these leagues and there's really there's some sort of criteria about what is Division I, Division II, and Division III, but with promotion and relegation again, it seems like there's just legal challenges that are going to be happening soon. I just wonder what you think about it.
Well, look, I mean, if there's no promotion and relegation, doesn't really matter whether you pro is Division II or NASL is Division II. And remember, NASL, the mantra used in NASL is that because there's no pyramid, we're not Division II. We're we just are what we are. Designations don't matter. Don't call us Division II because call us NASL. So if that's their belief that because there's no integrated pyramid, that league data in terms of the number used doesn't really matter, then why do they care if USL Pro goes for Division status? I don't know how legit that story is, and I'm not even sure how USL Pro can possibly measure up to the Division II standards. Because if I remember correctly, some are pretty stringent in terms of the amount of money, the size of the bond. These are not insignificant costs that USL Pro teams have to incur, and I don't think there are a lot of USL Pro teams outside of maybe the MLS back teams that have that sort of money. Anything else, David?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is I'm just wondering if there's some sort of published information out there about exactly what the criteria is, in terms of stadia, security, media for each of the divisions. I mean, is that actually published out there? And I'm wondering, is it really that big of a leap from whatever the second division standards are to the first division or second division to third division?
Well,
I'm just curious about that. I'm wondering if anybody's discussed that. But that's all. This
hasn't come up. I'm gonna let you go, David. It hasn't come up since the USL NASL split back in 2010. Now that was the TSA or TOA or whatever the hell they call themselves. The owners actually became the teams eventually became the NASL, breaking away from the USL structure. They weren't happy with a lot of the things that was going on in USL, including marketing and budgeting and some of the professionalism involved. So you had the split. US Soccer stepped in. Now, Brian Korstad over at Inside Minnesota Soccer was the guy that was on top of all of this. And he does have, again, these are 4 years old now, but he does have the Division II standards as published by US Soccer in 2010. And here you go. If you want to know what they are, league must determine a champion each year based on seasonal play or by means of a postseason tournament. Blah, blah, blah. At least 75% of the league's teams must be based in the United States. This actually came up a little bit with the NASL because they put teams in Edmonton. They put a team in Ottawa. There was some talk about moving some other teams into Canada, and they had to make sure that they were at that 75% threshold for the American team if they were going to be a Division II. And again, the way that they're talking, I don't know why they care. But they have to work within the U.S. soccer guidelines so that their players maintain FIFA eligibility. That's why they care. League stadiums must meet the following parameters. All stadiums must have controllable ingress, egress. Okay. All outdoor leagues, playing surfaces for all teams must be 70 by 110. That's a FIFA rule. Coaches, here's some standards on coaches. Financial viability. As specified for each division, the league must require each team to post with the league, or if so directed with the federation, an adequate performance bond or other security to secure the performance of the team's obligations, including players, staff salaries, wages, stadium commitments, third-party vendor obligations, commitments by the teams to the leagues for the current season. In the case of a single-entity league, okay, blah, blah, blah. The amount of any such bond or security shall be set by the federation at sole discretion. So you have a bond that they have to post, okay? I'm looking further here and towards the financial requirements. Let's see. Each team must submit a letter of credit in the amount of $750,000 with the joint beneficiary federation and the league in a form satisfactory, blah, blah, blah. Each team ownership group must demonstrate the financial capability to operate the team for 3 years. As part of the process of demonstrating financial capability, each ownership group must provide detailed financial history, verifiable individual financial net worth statements for each member of its group owning at least 5% interest in the team. Each team must have and designate one principal owner that owns at least 5% of the team and has authority to bind the team. Such principal owner must have an individual net worth of at least $20 million US, exclusive of his or her ownership of the league or team. This is just some of the stuff here that came out. So again, I don't know. I don't know what this means necessarily. I don't want to see infighting again. I'm not saying it's peaceful necessarily at the moment, and you do have some of these markets where teams are going up head to head, and I don't think that's great. You're cannibalizing each other on some fronts. But for the most part, the NSL has seemed content to do their thing. Let's build our league. If we're going to challenge MLS, let's do that stuff. And USL Pro has been content to partner with MLS to build up their business and support their teams, create a regional model that is more cost-effective with all those elements. Seth on Twitter, USL applying for D2 is a good thing. Will force better facilities in Pro and make NASL grow the brand. I hope. Okay. So there you go. On Vegas question, Seth again. You got to take Las Vegas now while the deal is there. Sacramento, Minnesota, and San Antonio will be there 5 years from now. Las Vegas may not, in my opinion. That may be true. That may be true. But again, the question for MLS, they want to be a guinea pig. They want to be the first major sports league to place a team in Vegas. The NBA has considered it, not yet. The NFL's never going to Vegas. Baseball, I don't think that's ever happening either. They want to sort of minimize team movement. There's one league that is expanding at this point in the United States of America that could on some level be called a major sports league, and that's MLS. The NFL's done. I don't think they're expanding anytime soon. 30 teams. Baseball's done. Hockey, I don't know if there's any appetite to continue to expand in hockey. So you have MLS. They're it. If they're fourth or fifth or whatever. Major team sports, they're the ones expanding. They're the only league that would have the wherewithal, the desire, when they're adding teams, to go into Las Vegas. There are a lot of things to consider. The money's there. I don't know enough about the market. I know that Herculez Gomez has been a major proponent of MLS to Vegas. That's great. He's a Vegas guy. Maybe we should talk to Herculez about that. We should also talk to Herculez about moving to Puebla, because apparently that happened. He will play with Puebla in the Clausura in 2015. It's another bit of news out there. Also in the news, and if you didn't see this, Marco Royce, this is unbelievable to me. I had to tell Trevor about this, and his jaw dropped. Marco Royce was fined for driving in Germany without a license for the past 3 years. His fine was $650,000. $650,000. 25-year-old has been advertising his club's car sponsor and has appeared in advertisements for gasoline. He's received speeding tickets on at least 5 occasions since 2011. Before authorities realized he'd been driving without a license. The reasons I did it are something I cannot really understand, he said. What do you mean? You can't understand why you didn't go get your license? Dortmund said they discussed the matter with the player. Spokesman Sascha Fliege said he has promised such a thing will not happen again. It didn't happen one time. It's not like the guy got drunk and fell down in public and embarrassed the club. He's been driving without a license for 3 years. That's incredible fight. Good Lord. Dan tells me that the NHL is exploring possibility of Vegas expansion. Okay, how real is that? Maybe I'm not tuned into the NHL news beat. How real is NHL exploring Vegas expansion? Gringo Mark, even without gambling, pro players will find trouble. Remember NFL players going to Miami for the Super Bowl and going AWOL. Well, okay, look, at some point, you have to trust the adults in the room and say, hey, we're going to go put a team in Vegas. Be smart about this. Yeah, you can go and get drunk and gamble away all your money and go to strip clubs and do all of that stuff. Eventually, that should get old. And if you're a professional that's committed to your craft, you don't get sucked into that. Hopefully, you don't get sucked into that. All right. Thank you very much to Pablo MLS is Twitter. 1/3 of Open Wide Soccer, which you can find here on backheel.com. Make sure you're listening. It's a DC-focused podcast, but it's a fantastic soccer product regardless of where you might be. Check out his abandoned work as well. It's fantastic for DC. Fantastic stuff from Pablo. This is, probably why he likes RFK. That one guy. I mean, look, you can all have warm and fuzzies for RFK based on what's happened there. But no one's going to look at the building and go, that's beautiful, except for Pablo Maurer. Also, thanks to Manuel Veth for his insight into the Russian situation, the ruble crashing. Has it stopped? Are we at the bottom in terms of where the ruble is right now? So the only time I care about the economy. Well, I care about the U.S. economy. But the only time I care about foreign economies. That has to do with soccer. Can't do it. Can't do it. All right. Thanks for listening. Check out the show. Make sure you check out the show on iTunes. Give us a rating and review. It helps us out a lot. What else? 3nilfc.com. Oh, yeah. Backheel.com/store. Go get your mug. Buy your soccer morning mug. Follow us on Twitter, Soccer Morning. And, we'll see you guys on Friday. Later.
More